let's take you to the Middle East now, where a wave of Israeli airstrikes across much of Gaza overnight has triggered the displacement of hundreds of Palestinian families. People in Gaza City saying dozens of air raids targeted densely populated eastern neighbourhoods. A school was hit in Zaytoun. That's an area that was sheltering displaced families. The bombardment follows one of the largest evacuation orders issued by Israel since the war with Hamas resumed in March. There has been speculation in the Israeli media that some generals consider the military is close to completing its objectives in the Palestinian territory. Let's bring you Wira Davis. He's our Jerusalem correspondent. He's got more now on the latest offensive, Israel's latest offensive in Gaza.
Well, several people are reported to have been killed in overnight Israeli airstrikes, particularly in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. One resident is said to have described them as the most intensive airstrikes since the resumption of the war in Gaza back in March, after a very short ceasefire. Among those areas targeted last night was a former school in the eastern part of Gaza City, where several families, hundreds of people, are displaced and are sheltering from the war. Several people were reported to have been killed. Others were taken to a nearby hospital. One woman is reported to have said that she and her family had been moved at least 7 times during the course of the war. And all of this comes after a warning from the Israeli military over the weekend to thousands of people, particularly in the north of Gaza, to move because of an intensive Israeli military campaign in the area. But the problem, say the UN and Palestinian agencies, is that the areas they're being asked to move to are not considered safe. Indeed, many people say that nowhere in Gaza can be considered safe at this point. There's speculation now as to what the intentions of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are. He, of course, is known to have wanted to have continued the war to defeat Hamas militarily, but he's under pressure internationally from Donald Trump, but also from the families of the hostages in Israel to try and reach a ceasefire deal to secure the release of the remaining hostages and finally bring an end to this war. But it's still too early to say what will happen over the next few days and if those ceasefire talks will resume.
Let's talk more about the possibility of ceasefire talks with Sultan Barakat, who is Professor of Public Policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University, also a Senior Associate Fellow at the security think tank RUSI. Sultan, very good to see you. Before we get into that, though, I have just been sent the latest from the Hamas-run Health Ministry of deaths and injuries in the last 24 hours, which I'd like to bring to people. 28 people killed and 223 injuries arriving at Gaza's hospitals during the past 24 hours as a result of the IDF offensive. But Sultan, firstly, what do you make of these reports coming out of Israel? Military sources say they are close to wrapping up their ground offensive.
Well, I mean, to be honest, they've run out of targets. There's nothing left in Gaza. And the military commanders have expressed repeatedly the fact that they're becoming more vulnerable by operating from within Gaza than before. So their soldiers are now being targeted. And we saw the last 2 weeks, the number of casualties amongst the Israeli soldiers is greater. So there is no direct benefit from them being operating within Gaza. The difficulty here is that Netanyahu and his coalition government, they're still pursuing the objective of defeating Hamas and releasing the captives. And that objective has simply proven impossible. You cannot defeat Hamas the way he understands that. And I think now, coming out of the 12-day war with Iran, he must feel very frustrated that he could not achieve his objectives in Iran either, and maybe frustrated also by the way Trump has reacted to that scenario. So he's now taking his anger on the Palestinians, and it continues. The objective will remain, as far as he's concerned, is to displace the Palestinians. And the more bombing that takes place, the more uninhabitable the land is. And he makes it much more possible for an ultimate agenda that he really wants to push ahead with, and that is to displace them out of Gaza.
What about the possibility of a ceasefire then? US officials in Washington today, as always, there are mediators in Cairo and in Doha as well. There are these key sticking points that remain, but does it feel like a ceasefire could be any closer?
Well, I think it's in the interest of Trump in particular to bring an end to this conflict. He has invested a great deal over the last few months in the Arab world, particularly in the Gulf states. You know, billions of dollars are at stake at the moment. He does not want that to be at risk. He would like to see an end of the war in Gaza, and he must be now pushing for that. Maybe something similar to the way he ended the conflict with Iran could be at play. But I personally suspect that Netanyahu will play for time. He will delay things as much as possible until he visits Washington again, where he can put on an act similar to the one he did this time last year in July, I think 24th of July 2024, where he will go and try and play the Congress and the Israeli lobby in Washington and place more pressure on the Trump administration to further support his objective. He's not going to rest until he sees the Palestinians out of Gaza. And this is unfortunately driven both by his ideology, extreme ideology, but also by the need for him to survive politically. Any less achievement in Gaza will lead to the collapse of his government, which relies entirely on his very fragile coalition with the extreme settlers. So it's likely that even if they engage in talks, Netanyahu will drag those talks on until he visits Washington, D.C.
Sultan, good to get your thoughts. Thank you for joining us. Sultan Barakat there. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.